Representative Shirley Owens Hicks. She retired from the Massachusetts House of Representatives after 20 years in 2007. She also served as an elected school committee member from 1984 to 1988, simultaneously serving in both offices in 1988. She made history by serving as a chairwoman of the Committee on Education, Arts and Humanities, the first African American and the first woman who held this position. She has served also as a chairwoman of the Massachusetts Black Legislative Caucus, the Special Commission on Long-Term Care Services for the Elderly, and the Task Force on Women in Poverty. She is consistent in her strong advocacy on behalf of African Americans and other people of color, children, senior citizens, and the unempowered. And we have also a great respondent this afternoon, Dr. Cassie Darr. She is the professor of the Hebrew Bible at School of Theology, Boston University. She is the author of many, many books and articles. And she served on the education editorial board for the New Interpreter's Bible commentary that you use every week, I believe. And also, she is the first woman in School of Theology history who hold the position as a chair of the faculty council at Boston University. So I want to present two great women here.
So I've been eating cough drops. For my people everywhere, singing their slave songs repeatedly, their dirges and their ditties and their blues and jubilees, saying their prayers nightly to an unknown God, bending their knees humbly to an unseen power. For my people lending their strength to the years, to the gone years and the now years and the maybe years, washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, hoeing, plowing, digging, dragging along, never gaining, never reaping, never knowing, and never understanding. For my playmates in the clay and dust and sands of Alabama backyards, playing baptizing and preacher and doctor and jail and school and playhouse and Miss Chumby and hair and company. For the cramped, bewildered years we went to school to learn to know the reasons why and the answers to, and the people who and the places where, and the days when, in memory of the bitter hours when we discovered that we were black and poor and small and different, and nobody wondered and nobody understood. For the boys and girls who grew up in spite of these things to be men and women, to marry their playmates and their children, and then die of consumption and anemia and lynching. For my people thronging 47th Street in Chicago, Lenox Avenue in New York, and Rampart Street in New Orleans, a lost, disinherited, dispossessed, and happy people, filling the cabarets and taverns and other people's pockets, needing bread and land and milk and shoes and money and something, all our own. For my people floundering and groping in the dark of churches and schools and clubs and societies, associations, and conventions, a distraught and disturbed people being devoured and preyed on by money-hungry, glory-craving leeches, preyed on by fad and novelty, by false prophets and holy believers. For my people dancing when happy, drinking when hopeless, shouting when burdened, tied, shackled, and tangled among ourselves by the unseen creatures who tower over us omnisciently and laugh. For my people standing, staring, trying to fashion a better way from confusion, from hypocrisy and misunderstanding, trying to fashion a world that will hold all the people, all the faces, all the Adams and Eves in their countless generations. Let a new earth rise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let freedom be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control. Dr. Choi, Dr. Dar, Ms. Jeanette, those of whom I've spoken with, and others of you who are here, good afternoon. And I read that poem because Margaret Walker, who was the poet, in her own way, chronicles her experiences and observations regarding the lifestyles of Black people during the first 27 years of her life. She was born in 1915. And I chose to share this poem today because it somewhat epitomizes my own experience while growing up in Alabama during the 1940s and early to mid 1950s. And actually, it goes beyond that. This poem was published in 1942, and that was the year I was born. At the poem's end, Walker issues a prayer, or maybe a prophecy, or maybe both, when she says, "Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth." I think I'm a member of that second generation that she was talking about, since I was born in 1942. And I think that began to forge ahead and was buttressed by the hard work and the bloody battles that my people, through pain and suffering, had to endure. And due to the strength and courage of our ancestors, I am a member of that second generation that began to come to growth. Walker also says, "Let the martial songs be written, let the dirges disappear." And I'm reminded of an old Negro spiritual that says, "Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down." And then there was another one that said, "I don't feel no ways tired. I come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me the road would be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me." No dirges there. These songs were encouragement, songs of hope, songs of faith, and they were sung with certainty. And I think that since she said, "Let the dirges disappear," it seems that she was really either a prophet or a prayerful woman, or both. So, this is what Margaret Walker prophesied, and it did come to pass. To digress just a little bit, of course, all is not well. We still have a long way to go, even though today we have our first, in the history of the United States, our first African-American president, President Barack Obama. It doesn't mean that we have arrived, because I know if you watch MSNBC or any of the other news stations, you can't help but understand that there are so many people who would rather see him fail than to have what this society and these United States of American citizens deserve. Margaret Walker and I have a few other things in common. She was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was born in Demopolis, Alabama. Her father was a Methodist minister, and my father was a Baptist pastor. And I've already established the coincidence of her poem having been published in 1942, but there's only one other additional commonality that she and I share. She was a brilliant poet, and my commonality with her is that I get to talk about her poem. Since this poem speaks to a good number of my childhood observations, I share it also because I believe that our decisions throughout life are based upon how we view our past experiences and how it is that we use them to guide our behaviors in the future. This poem provides a setting in the first act of a play, as it were, which ultimately spans the close to 72 years of my existence to date. So when I consider our title, Leadership, Women and Power Dynamics, I cannot overlook who I am and from whence I came in order to ensure that my opinions are based on honesty and truth. So after starting and stopping and pondering and thinking, and my respondent can attest to some of that, about the best way for me to approach the subject, I finally decided to Google the principles of power and see what they were saying. And as I was reading that article, somewhere within the context, I discovered the words, the power of principles. And I said, that's what I've been looking for. Because all the time I was trying to think of how I did what I did, and I would have to think about my upbringing and what our parents taught us, and how it is that we were able to do what we did, and how they, said that we had to carry ourselves so circumspectly that we would command respect, and we did not have to demand respect. And how it is that my mother taught us a whole lot of poems because she was a former English teacher, and she taught us poems and quotes from the Bible, while my father also joined her with teaching us quotes from the Bible, but he taught us how to survive in a world where there were people who did not look like us and did not want us to be existing. I remember, this is just a brief story, and it's really not a part of this part of my speech, but while I'm talking about Daddy, he used to, I came from a small town, Demopolis, Alabama. It was so small, I don't know what the numbers were, I think maybe 3,000 people, maybe from 1,500 to 3,000. All I know is that if you walked 7 blocks from wherever you lived, you could be on your way out of town. And it was distinctly different community. It was separate community. It was separate and very unequal. The schools were separate, the facilities were separate, the neighborhoods were certainly separate. And I really did not know any white people, but my dad did. And he used to, when he took my sister and I to town to buy Easter shoes or clothes or whatever, invariably he would always see somebody that he knew, some white person that he knew, and he would say, he had a big booming voice because he was a preacher, a very popular preacher who sang and preached hard. So he had this big voice that used to say, "Hello, white folks." And they would say, "Hello, preacher." And then they would start to have this seemingly companionable conversation. And my sister and I would be fidgeting because we wanted to go, but they would talk, and then we would go on our way. And I never understood why he did that, because Dad had always told us how great we were. My sister and I, and our brothers too, but they had a different kind of upbringing than we did. But he told us how wonderful we were, how beautiful, and how smart, and we knew we were smart. But but he he just built us up, and he said, "There's nobody better than you. Nobody, no white person, no black person, nobody is better than you." But he also admonished us not to look down on anybody. He said, because everybody has something to offer this world that nobody else has. And so just because you have what you do have, and you have a lot, and I praise God for it, it doesn't mean that you're better than somebody who has something different. They just have something different. So we understood that. And, well, I just always thought that Daddy, I couldn't understand how when he said all that to us, he would talk about hello white folks. I just didn't understand it. I thought he was being an Uncle Tom. And when we were grown-ups, my siblings and I were sitting around chatting, as we generally did, getting together, and I just brought it up. We were talking about Daddy, and I brought it up. I said, but how could he do all of this wonderful stuff and teach us all this stuff and do that? And one of my brothers said, Oh, you never understood. Daddy was equaling the playing field. He was calling them what they were, and they were calling him what he was. They were white folks and he was a preacher. So therefore, he didn't have to say, hello, Mr. Lawson, for example, and have them say to him, hello, Joe. And so that was an eye-opener for me. And I just, ever since then, I've been telling that story every once in a while because it reminds me of how it is that, I guess when we talk about navigating power, that was one of the ways that could be done. But as I was reading the outline regarding the principles of power, I saw that obviously they were neither gender nor race specific, but they did provide information about what it takes to be a true leader. And just to share some of this with you, leaders keep the end in sight. And there was an example of a CEO, I think in Washington, D.C., who was charged with the responsibility of securing a building for their program. And they had a child advocacy program, and they dealt with children who had special needs. And the city said no, they would not sell them a building. So she was sort of taken aback for a while because her responsibility was to get a new building. But it occurred to her that the assignment was not to purchase a building, it was to obtain a building. Mm-hmm. So she sought to lease it, and with the admonishment that her organization had to be a part, an integral part of all of the planning that was made and the layout so that it could accommodate their clients, and that happened. So that led me to understand that there's room for negotiation in almost anything that you encounter if you but set your mind to it. The next thing I understood that there are servant leaders. And the example was that a woman who was a hospital social worker and had to comfort parents of children who had been abused by family members prayed before each session, and with tremendous results. And also, it speaks about, I want to speak about some people that I know, two pastors who co-pastor a church, and they're both medical doctors. And they have always talked about how they pray before each surgery that any one of them has to perform. So, those are servant leaders that have to be lauded and applauded for what they do. They help others achieve, these leaders. They take initiative. They chart their own course. They love to learn. They fight a good cause. They're change agents. And I also understand that the most important words for a leader, there are from 1 to 6 in level of importance. The 6 most important words are, I admit I made a mistake. 5 most important words are, you did a good job. 4 most important words are, what is your opinion? 3 most important words are, if you please. 2 most important words are, thank you. The first most important word is we. And the least important word for a leader is I. Those were enlightening readings to me. And, I thought about that, and I was thinking about the power of principles as I was reading all of this, because, that was what we knew. And actually, my mother had us memorize this poem called Myself. And it goes, I have to live with myself, and so I want to be fit for myself to know. I want to be able, as days go by, always to look myself straight in the eye. I want to go out with my head erect. I want to deserve all men's respect, for here, in this struggle for fame and pelf, I want to be able to like myself. I don't want to be a blusterer, buffer, an empty show while thinking that nobody else will know the kind of person I really am. I don't want to dress up myself in sham. I can never hide myself from me. I see what others may never see. I know what others may never know. I cannot fool myself. And so, whatever happens, I want to be self-respecting and conscience-free. And so, ever since then, my motto has been, I have to live with myself and so. I want to be fit for myself to know. Just those words. And they have guided me through relationships, both business and personal, and certainly in leadership. They have definitely guided me because I know that I have to answer to me. And I'm a tough person to answer to. So that has happened, and it's governed my action throughout my leadership career. When I first came to Boston, well, actually, when I was 8 years old, I joined the church. In Demopolis, Alabama, in the Baptist church, we had revival. We had a week of revival. And during that week, if you were praying for a religion, then that's all you could do. You couldn't play outside. You couldn't do anything but pray. And hopefully at the end of that week, you would feel that you've been saved and joined the church. Well, some people did, some people didn't. I joined at 8 years old. And some people thought it was too young, but the church had to take a vote, and my father said, no, she's not too young. And so I was allowed to do it. But at any rate, I became the president of Sunbeam Band when I was 8 years old in church. And we came to Boston when I was 13 and a freshman in high school. And by the time I was 14, a sophomore, I was class president. And I was again elected president in senior year. And in the interim, the junior year, I was Secretary of State of Massachusetts Girls State. Very active in the usher boards in the junior usher board, national office, New England office. Always adhering to that same motto. I have to live with myself, and so I want to be fit for myself to know. Dr. Choi has talked somewhat about my elected career, so I won't go into that right now. But I have to tell you that I come here today with the double challenge of leadership, and that's why I read the poem by Margaret Walker, because she talks about the things that, in her eloquence, she pretty much says the things that I have experienced growing up in Alabama. And so that's me, that's who I am. And the second, of course, I come as a woman. So in addition to my motto mentioned above, I have to live with myself, and so I want to be fit for myself to know, I have to tell you that prayer and faith are my major partners. I've been praying since I was 8 years old to get 100% on a test. And guess what? I always got the 100% on the test. It's like God has been so good to me, and I can't thank him enough. So when we talk about the principles of power, and we talk about the power of principles, I found that the kinds of things that I had learned about the principles of power were actually interwoven with the power of my principles. So even though I hadn't read that before, I was familiar with it once I read it, because that's what it was all about. Principles, I think, more than anything else, guide a leader. You know, when you learn the 10 Commandments and it says, do unto others you will have them do unto you, that's what it's all about. And if you don't, then you won't be fit for yourself to know. And so we were asked to think about some things as we did our remarks. As a woman, how do you negotiate power dynamics in your unique leadership position? 2, power dynamics are inescapable, even though women may not like to talk about them. Can you share strategies with us about how you navigate that ever-present reality? And the third was that we might be asked beforehand if we feel comfortable speaking about places where we feel powerless. And I had made a list of a number of things that might answer at least two segments of this three-party query. But I decided that in the interest of time, if during questions and answers I might be able to share some of that, I would. But I knew that if we began the questions and answers, I wouldn't have a chance to let you know where I'm from and what brings me to issue the words from my mouth that I do. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, I know. I just got up and walked to the podium. I got here a little late this morning. I didn't see anybody else get up and walk to the podium. And because opportunities like this invite you to engage in more self-reflection than you might really want to do, I can't help asking myself why I got up and walked to the podium just a minute ago. Perhaps I did it because this is a long, narrow room, and those of you who are in the back, probably, hi, how are you? Probably have a limited view of what's going on up here, so maybe that's why I did. Maybe I did it because I've been a professor for a long time and I feel at home behind a podium. Not only that, but I can have notes in front of me and you can't really see them because of this piece right here. Maybe I got up and walked to the podium because in order to address a topic this difficult, I need to be able to marshal all of my energy from the bottom of my feet upward in order to project it out to you. And maybe I got up and walked to the podium because I need a mighty fortress between me and thee. In any event, I'm here now, so I guess I'll stay. I am truly delighted to participate with each of you in the Anna Howard Shaw Center's annual Women in the World Conference. And I am especially honored by this opportunity to respond to the presentation by our distinguished guest, Representative Shirley Owen Hicks. Shirley and I are both certain that we know each other from an earlier occasion, but thus far neither of us can remember what it was. As an academic, I've been asked to give formal responses in conference settings on more than one occasion. And generally, that task entails subjecting to scrutiny what my presenter has said only moments before. But of course, this is an entirely different sort of situation. Representative Owen Hicks has shown us how to claim formative experiences, to be true to ourselves, even and especially when others want us to be someone else. She doesn't need any advice from me about how to be herself, and I have no intention of making the mistake of doing that. My goals, rather, are to offer a few thoughts about leadership, women, and power dynamics. Thoughts arising primarily from my almost over 2-year term as chair of Boston University's Faculty Council. Now, I have a confession to make, and that is that this is the first time I have talked about that leadership role in the way I hope to talk about it in the next few minutes. To be sure, I'm fairly comfortable talking about my goals and even on my accomplishments, so long as I keep my voice and tone and content appropriately meek and humble. But I am far less comfortable talking about my leadership styles. And I wonder why. I suspect that my discomfort in talking about my leadership styles arises from who I am and where I came from. I am a white Southern woman raised in a Christian community who was taught that there are some things we just don't talk about. That there are some sorts of attention we just don't draw to ourselves. And if, heaven forbid, we have to say something of those sorts, we better be very careful how we say them, because I heard this on television 2 days ago. In the South, people can bless your hearts in one breath and tell you where to go in the next. So I was raised to be aware of these things and to be discreet and cautious as best I could. Well, we're talking about leadership and women and power dynamics and all of those things, and so I'm going to start by stating the obvious. And that is that women and men, so men, I know you're out there, I see you out there. I don't want you to think that I don't know you're out there, but given this event, you may catch me speaking more to women than I'm speaking to you. Please forgive me, the balance sheet still is on your side. Anyway, women and men become leaders in lots and lots of different ways. Sometimes we move into leadership roles over time without really having to do much at all, and whether we want to move into those roles or not. So 1 minute you are an entering MDiv student. Yes? Any entering? Yes, there they are. So 1 minute you're an entering MDiv student, and everything you encounter seems strange and new. 2 years later, you're a third year MDiv. A student leader to whom the latest crop of entering MDivs turns for advice about classes to take, groups to join, professors to avoid, the meanings of endless, obscure acronyms, and filling out an endless parade of official forms. Yeah. In other cases, leadership responsibilities come quickly because others recognize your particular knowledge, skills, and talents and want to harness them in service to the issues and concerns they most care about, or would rather you take over. So you join a new church congregation, and as soon as people learn that you're an MDiv or an MTS degree student, they ask you to teach a Bible study series, to lead the youth group, to preach while the pastor is on vacation, to resolve an especially complex personal problem. If you haven't been there yet, you will. In still other cases, however, you intentionally rise through the ranks of leadership, step by step. You invest time and energy in a worthy organization, serve on several of its committees, agree to run for this or that office, and win the election. Hallelujah, or darn, as the case may be. Now you're a committee chair, a high-ranking administrator, an official spokesperson, a community organizer, the CEO of an entire enterprise. These scenarios illustrate just a few ways that women and men become leaders. And in each example, inescapable, challenging, sometimes confounding power dynamics come into play. Sometimes in different and sometimes in identical ways. For many, not all women, power dynamics can seem especially daunting, haunting, and difficult to maneuver for reasons many, not all, men either don't think about much or think about in vastly different ways. Now make no mistake, both women and men must contend with issues of authority, with power dynamics, with competing leadership styles, and so on. Nevertheless, the challenges that men and women face can differ enormously. As a woman of a certain age, I am well aware of time-worn, but still alive and kicking socio-cultural forces that convince some women leaders, consciously or unconsciously, that they must be meek, humble leaders of a certain sort. You don't have to answer this question out loud or even raise a hand, but think about it. How many women preface their requests and directives with an apology? I'm sorry, but don't you think we should forgive me? But I'm wondering if you've ever heard these words coming out of your mouth, and it'll be a miracle if I get through my remarks without saying one or the other. Or if you've become aware of how many women say them over and over, then you know that while humility is indeed an essential aspect of leadership, undermining yourself, overtly or more subtly, reveals a lot about the gender baggage that many women, older, in between, and far younger, are still carrying around. Perhaps you grew up in a family that harbored very different expectations for sons and daughters. And those expectations still shape your self-expectations no matter how old you've become. You were or are the caretaker of younger sibs, the peacemaker when sibling rivalries spring up, the nurturer in charge when a parent takes a trip. Make no mistake, Much of what you will learn from assuming these roles can stand you in good stead throughout your life. But it can also affect both your understanding of leadership and how comfortable you feel exercising it. My sense is that many, not all women, are uncomfortable with the very idea of exercising leadership and authority. Let me share with you a classroom conversation I was part of well over a decade ago. Things have changed somewhat, maybe not entirely. At the time, my course load included leading a contextual education discussion group that included both female and male students. Not surprisingly, questions about leadership, authority, and power dynamics emerged early in the semester. But on that particular occasion, I became aware that without exception, every woman in that room said something like, "Oh, I'm not interested in power. I don't want authority. I don't believe in hierarchies. I'm comfortable only with the concept of servant leadership." I've heard that. To be sure, some of the men in the room expressed the same sentiments, but not to the same extent or in the same ways. I remember feeling conflicted about what I was hearing. Power grabbing is not an exercise I enjoy, especially in others. A person's overpowering sense of authority can stifle everyone else in a room or in a church or in a corporation for that matter. Hierarchies bear the blame for some of humankind's most odious sins. And servant leadership isn't just a worthy, biblically based concept. It can recreate our understandings of power and authority in astonishing ways. Nevertheless, I knew full well that, like it or not, most of the women in that classroom were headed for formal leadership positions in a variety of organizations and institutions, including local congregations, the church writ large, healthcare facilities, pastoral counseling offices, the academy, the military, and on and on and on. And I couldn't help wondering if, when, and how they would come to handle situations in which the willingness and confidence to step forward without apology were essential. So if all of us are going to be leaders in some fashion, in some setting, at some time, and if it only makes sense to prepare ourselves for leadership roles sooner as well as later, what steps can we take as we contemplate assuming leadership roles, and also as we reassess how we are currently functioning as leaders? Every individual answers my question in his or her own way. But let me tell you how I've answered it at points in my life. For me, the first step is a prayer requesting God's guidance. A prayer requesting God's guidance. Those of you who know of my fondness for Proverbs, and some of the people in the back of the room do, won't be surprised to learn that a well-known aphorism, part of a poem to the louse, yeah, that kind of louse, part of a poem to the louse penned by the 18th century Scottish poet and lyricist, Robert Burns, encapsulates at least part of the content of my initial prayer. Translated into vernacular English, the lines from this poem read, "Would that God the gift would give us to see ourselves as others see us." That idea is part of the prayer that I pray. But it's not the entire prayer. The rest of the prayer I pray goes something like this. Gracious God, open, embolden, and enable me to see myself as you see me. And also to see myself as others see me. So that I can hear truths about myself that I don't recognize. So that I can hear truths about myself that I need to know. And especially so that I can hear truths about myself that I do not wish to know. This prayer leads me to a second step, taking a good long look in the mirror. Not a piece of glass with silver paint on one side, but the mirror that invites you and me to look deep inside ourselves. Representative Owen Hicks has modeled that process for us just moments ago. She interprets, understands, and presents herself in her diverse leadership roles over many years as the stuff of her unique autobiography, her experiences, the people she has known, those who has shaped her. When I look in the mirror, I have to be willing to ask myself, what kind of leader do I think I am? What kind of leader do I want to be? What kind of leader do I feel well equipped to be? What kind of leader do I fear I could never be? Would I end up being the kind of leader I least admire? Would I rather be swallowed up by the earth than be the leader I fear I will be? What baggage, good and bad, will I bring to the task before me? Do we, in any way see this leadership opportunity as a chance to get back at someone or something that has offended, angered, hurt, or ignored me in the past? Did I accept this leadership position, or am I holding on to it past my prime time because it looks great on my resume?
Yeah.
My sister, Pam, 2 years older than I am, she's an artist, and every time anyone in the family accomplishes anything, my sister's immediate response is, "That will look great on my resume." It's a stock phrase that she utters whenever she has an opportunity, but it is a serious question. Why am I contemplating being a leader? What motivations, not motivation, but motivations are driving me? I think that when we ask ourselves these questions and answer them honestly, we can receive answers that surprise us. But I also think that this step is one best not taken in isolation from other human beings. For even when I approach God in prayer, I'm just human enough, just devious enough, just fearful enough to think that I can conceal something about myself even from my Maker. And so, for me at least, this second step is a dialogue. A dialogue between God and myself, but also a dialogue or dialogues between myself and persons who have known me well for a really long time. People I trust to speak the truth with love. People who I can count on to take up that very difficult task. For make no mistake, it's always easier to say to someone, "That was great. You did such a good job. How could we possibly have pulled this off without you?" And so on. When I was elected chair of Boston University Faculty Council, I recognized that it was my task to function within some intractable hierarchies. Boston University is an enormous institution, a complex one, and there are people of power in positions that far exceed the position of power that I do occupy. I had to decide what I was going to stand up for and what I would be forced to allow to pass by. In my case, I decided early on that I was going to take my stand on a problem that has plagued Boston University throughout its history. And that is the very low numbers of underrepresented minority faculty who are part of this university. I have seen the statistics, and my friends, they are not good. And over and over again, I have forced myself or taken delight in pointing out this problem to people who have a lot more power than I do. In fact, at least one of those people has wanted to wring my neck on at least 2 occasions, and been quite open about that. The task I selected is difficult not because the people who run Boston University don't care about diversity or are heartless on the issue or think it's just one minor concern about many. They don't want me to talk about this issue too much in too many places because they know it is a shortcoming of this institution and they don't like to hang dirty laundry on the line. And so I stand up. But before you think too much of me for that, you should take into consideration that I am a tenured full professor at this institution. That I've been here for a little over 30 years now, and that somewhere along the way, for whatever reason, I developed a steel rod that runs up the back of my spine. If I had run for the office I've been holding for the last 2 years, 20 years ago, it would have been a monstrous failure. Because I would have entered a leadership position that I was not yet ready to assume. And of course, over the last 2 years, I've learned in many ways how much better I could have been at this job if I had been smarter and wiser and more of a servant leader and more humble and so on. And of course, I'm always aware of the danger I have for speaking more and listening less, and my time is over, so I'm going to sit down. But I want you to think of yourselves as leaders in progress, regardless of your ages. Because leadership isn't something we control, and leaders are not something we are. These are qualities we become. With our strengths and our weaknesses, our insights and our blind spots, and by the grace of God. Thanks.
This morning, I think you are swallowing and eating so rich content here, and I hope that you chew well, so you don't have to so much of these digesting problems. And now we want to just take 1 or 2 questions before we move on to another panel. Okay, can I move on then? Okay, 1.
I think I was intrigued, and I obviously know both panelists, but I was intrigued because you're both from the South, and you approach leadership in similar but very different ways. So my question is, as you've engaged with each other in the preparation for this forum today, were there any unique things that you learned from each other about leadership and power in women?
She said first that we're both Southern women. She asked as we were preparing for this hour, is there anything we learned about each other from how we prepared?
Oh, okay. I did. I learned that my respondent held a position that I wasn't aware of. You know, I think what people should do whenever they're going to be involved in any kind of situation is to get to know who it is that you're going to be involved with. I knew Dr. Doris' name, I talked with her, I corresponded with her, but I did not know the depth of your experience, which I admire, and it's tremendous.
I know
30
yours
years.
too.
Thank you. So I was also interested to learn that you were from the South, because I know that the South has changed and that people have changed. I think, I hope. I haven't been there a lot since 1955. I go every once in a while because my class with whom I didn't graduate because I came to Boston allows me to come back to class reunions, and that's great, so I go sometimes. But, you know, I know that some of the practices have changed since I was there. And whenever I meet somebody who is from the South, I often wonder who they were when I was a child, or you probably weren't born then, but who they were when I was a child, and how it is that they became who they are now, which is, you know, if you were there, which is the wonderful person you are. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about where I came from, because it's important to know. And thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome. Well, I learned, I'll tell you something I learned some time ago and something I learned right before we started. The thing I learned some time ago is that Shirley was going to speak the truth about who she understands herself to be. And that made me feel very excited to hear what she was going to say. And it also became an opportunity for me to think about where I've come from and how I came to be who I am. We're both from the South, but our experiences are not the same, and we both know that. So that was one thing I learned. The other thing I learned is that right before we began this hour, both of us felt a need to pray, and so we took a hold of each other's hands and we offered a prayer in preparation for our remarks. And that taught me something that I have been blessed to learn on many occasions, and that is that the power of prayer unites us in the causes we undertake and permits us not only to receive God's power, but also to empower each other.
You both have very different kinds of experiences in different situations. And you both have recorded your number first. And so I am assuming, this is not rocket science, that you had some difficult challenges to overcome. Can you both speak to one thing, one event, or one person in your life that helped push you past the difficulties that you encountered?
Well, you asked for one person and one thing.
Or
Sorry?
Or one thing.
Or one thing, okay. I alluded to it in my speech, in my presentation rather. It was my family. I mean, my dad was he was like a race man. You called him race man in those days. He was a person who, even though we were in the South, and even though there was racism all around, he believed in pride of race, and he believed in lineage of self. And he did whatever he could to ensure that we, as his children, grew up to be prideful. So somebody would say to me, and besides, you know, we had to bring all A's home. So that was another thing, that you could not come with less than honor roll. And you know, all A's was just the ultimate. So it let us know that we could do anything we wanted to do. Somebody said to me, one of my classmates from Boston, she and I were talking, one of my high school classmates from Boston, she and I were talking not too long ago, and I was saying something about Oh, when I came to Boston, I was so scared because I was from Alabama and it was a small town, and Boston was so big, and I didn't know how I was going to fit in. And she said, I thought that you were the epitome of professionalism. She says, I had no idea you were scared. I said, I was, but I knew I had to do what I had to do because my daddy said it. So I guess my mom and my dad, but my 4 brothers who were older than us, and my sister who's here with me today, she was always the mother. And I would be like the rebellious one, but she kept me in check.
I have a marvelous family, and I love my field, and I'm happy every day to take up the job that I hold. And there are so many good things that that I could point to that have been totally formative in my life. But I think the one thing I would point to is the School of Theology community. Not just this one, but the one I joined in 1983, and what I have been able to learn from the people I have known in this context. And quite frankly, one of them is sitting at the table right in front of me, and that's Margaret Weiborg. When I came to BU, I was a Kentuckian who had done her master's and doctoral degrees at Vanderbilt, and I have to tell you that, not many people had talked to me about the importance of feminism. And I arrived at the school an absolute novice. And scared to death, because there were some powerful women around the School of Theology, including Margaret and, oh my, Elizabeth Bettenhausen, who just seemed so together and so much the way that I wanted to be, that compared to them, I felt, it was not a good feeling. Not because they tried to make me feel that way, but just because I did. I still have moments like that, being part of this community from time to time. But the School of Theology community over all these years, in ways painful and delightful and subtle and excruciatingly overt and so on, have allowed me to grow, to learn, and to grow. And so I can't think of anything other than my God that's been more important to me than this community in terms of my professional formation and personal formation as well. So that's how I'd respond.
Thank you. We are going to have to move on to the next program, but I want to give them like a great hand. Without interruption, we are going to the next the panel time, and I have one announcement to make. As I said, I have many emergencies yesterday and today, and one of the big emergencies that I had was actually one of my panelists, whose name is Reverend Heisha Machoka. She actually is 28 weeks pregnant, and she has so much problem right now in her body. And so in order to protect her baby, she cannot be here today. And I appreciate if you pray for her and her baby. And our next panelists, about 2 of them are here, so they can come out and then sit here. And I want to introduce our 2 panelists. We are actually, when the board members are designing this panel, but the first 2 panel is designed by the young leaders who maybe just graduated or the students still at this moment and want to talk about their own struggles about the leadership. So first panel with these two young panelists are going to have their time with our moderator, who is also our dean. And so I'm going to just introduce Dean Lighty, and she can introduce these two people. And Dean Lighty is going to be the moderator for this panel. And she is an ordained elder in the Northern Illinois Conference of the United Methodist Church, a scholar, a social justice activist, and a military veteran whose academic and research interest includes classical and contemporary just war theory, womanist theology, queer theory and theology, and African American religious history and theology. So here she is.
Thank you, Dr. Che. It's my pleasure to introduce to you all this afternoon after such an exciting panel with Dr. Dar and Representative Owen Hicks. The two following their students right now here at the School of Theology. Myung Park is the senior pastor of Colchester United Methodist Church in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts. She received her BA in Christian Education from Methodist University in Korea, a very fine university. I had the pleasure to visit there last year. After doing work at Ewha, Women's University in Korea, she received her Master of Divinity degree from Boston University School of Theology in 2012. She's completing her Master's of Sacred Theology here at the university, and her focus is on religious education and pastoral leadership. She's a former staff member at the Anna Howard Shaw Center, and she has a great interest in empowering women and children at the margin in society. Won't you help me to welcome Young to the panel this morning? Our next panelist is Katie Umberg, who is a first-year Master of Divinity student here at the School of Theology. She graduated magna cum laude from Mount Holyoke College in Southampton, Massachusetts. Her degree was in religion and art history. She hails from Washington, D.C., and worked at a national bicycle advocacy organization before returning to school to pursue ordination in the United Church of Christ. In addition to school, you should know that Katie draws comics about her experience as a queer youth. We are very fortunate to have her at the School of Theology, and won't you help me to welcome her to the panel. We will begin in the order in which I've done the introductions, and I think you're in for a treat. Thank you. You're welcome.
When I heard I would be a panelist in the Women in the World, and the theme is leadership, women and power dynamics, my first feeling was nervous. And second, I asked myself what should talk for this honored time, wonderful time with wonderful people. So, as a student who just completed MDiv degree from BU and who just appointed a church, I thought it would be best, thank you. I thought it would be best to share what I went through in my ministerial site for the first couple of months. Last July, I started ministry as a senior pastor at Colchester United Methodist Church in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts. In the beginning period of my ministry, I received very warm welcome from my parishioners and various local people from my town. I started my ministry by focusing on visiting my parishioners and getting to know them. Soon after I started, in one meeting, I realized that a pastor of a church could be called by many titles other than pastor or reverend. I was called to be cookie, sweetie, or young lady. I responded to people who called me by those cute names by saying, I never been a young lady, I never been a cookie, I never been a sweetie in my lifetime. The other incident, one time I had brunch with one of my parishioners, and we happened to meet a gentleman who was our former church member. My parishioner introduced me to him saying, "She is our new pastor." The gentleman nicely smiled and responded, "Oh good, you are. Welcome to our town." "Okay then, who is your preacher?" She is our preacher," my parishioner answered. Okay, then who is your preacher?" he asked again. He looked surprised. My parishioner and I confirmed that I will be preaching at the church every Sunday morning, but I still do not know whether he understood our answer. We never met since we met first time. Afterwards, an elderly member of our church who listened to the story told me that it might be because I don't look like an old person. She told me that you should have short and gray hair. Yes, I do not have short and gray hair. And I'm not an old-looking person. I hope so. I am comparatively young, single, female, and an ethnically Korean person. However, my physical appearance does not mean that I am not called by God, that I am not an adequate person to be a pastor, that I am not a spiritual person. I am the first female pastor in my church in its history of 170 years. I made history. A parishioner told me that in our church there are a couple of people who do not believe that clergy women should participate in preaching ministry. They might not come to church anymore. And the gentleman in our church did not want to ask me to pray for him before his surgery. Instead, he went an old male clergy person in our church to ask for blessing. My congregation has almost always had a strong father figure as a pastor. It is never easy for people in our congregation to accommodate to new forms of leadership. Some people I encountered in and outside of church seemed difficult to accept a woman as an authority figure, and they are surprised to find that I can actually officiate funeral and wedding and baptism. A new pastor who is youngest in our church, female, single, current student, Korean. I realized that my exterior condition did not allow me to have any power and authority as a spiritual leader. That was frustrating. So my strategy in responding to this challenge came from finding new possibilities and creative ways of thinking. I saw that this reality could be navigated by leading the congregation and myself through ways of celebration. I celebrated two aspects both in my congregation and in person. First, in my church community, I asked people to celebrate an opportunity to be inclusive, to learn mutually, and to grow together. From the pulpit, bravely, with courage, I reminded congregations that every human being is created, both men and women, created in image of God. Individuals are called to ministry with their different spiritual gifts to different ministries. That you will find a new gift and new leadership from me. Jesus interacted with different people beyond age, gender, social status, and ethnicity. Our caring godmother formed people in God's womb. And God is always on the side of oppressive, the hunger, and the lacking. Therefore, diversity and change is not primarily a problem to be solved, but the gift of God to be received, appreciated, and enjoyed. Therefore, we have to learn and empower one another so we can grow together. My current goal is inviting our congregation to openness and flexibility and finding out our way, not my way or your way. Even though this approach to celebrating inclusivity has not yet yielded significant changes, I do see that it has had some positive results. For instance, the church member I mentioned just before, who did not believe in a woman preacher, is still a strong member of our parish. Second, I celebrate my call to ministry by acknowledging that I am rooted and grounded in love of God. God constantly calls, nurtures, and empowers me with the power of Holy Spirit. Having a clear spiritual identity that I am a precious child of God and rooted in love of God helped me to realize that spiritual authority does not come from exterior conditions such as age, gender, ethnicity, and years of ministry, but it comes from the spirituality within. Spirituality within. When I first trust God's tremendous goodwill and empowerment, I can then be empowered and transformed, and this can in turn empower other people. Recognizing this truth gave me courage and confidence to break silence and find my inner voice. I started to practice being an empowered woman. I reminded myself that I should not be comfortable with my familiar story of a woman and man's role in church, which I've been taught from Korea. I started to unlearn what I learned from Christian traditional teaching, that women should be silent and to play a subjugated role in church. Sometimes I needed the confidence to step aside from society's expectations. Practicing empowerment and lifting up my voice is going to be a lifelong practice to me, who came from Korea and was raised in Christian family, whose father is pastor, and who was expected to be nice, kind, always obedient, and silent. However, as I practice empowerment, I seek to create and show a different way of leadership as a woman clergy. Indeed, my strategy of reaffirming God's call inside has helped me faithfully reaffirm my role in my church as a leader. In my view, women have always been leaders in their families and communities throughout human history by raising children, taking care of the elderly and sick, and feeding their communities. And we have all been under a certain woman's caring leadership in our lifetime. In faith-based communities, they have been leaders from pews, prayer rooms, kitchens, and choirs. Even though their leadership skills have seldom been recognized, rewarded, or perceived as valuable compared to the dominant other leaders, they showed that authentic leadership comes not only from power, but also from servanthood. The servanthood is not often found in traditionally male-dominant way of leadership. My goal is not to be like a male minister, but to be grounded in transforming love of God and to develop my potential as I am, as a woman, by using God's creative power within me. God gave different gifts to each person, and we are all encouraged and welcomed to lead. As a clergywoman, I believe that I will be best at work in my ministry when I accept God's gift and stop trying to lead like someone else. Believing in God's gift and calling within me, believing my own leadership, I believe we as clergywomen are called to create a new leadership model which is transformative, liberating, and empowering to both men and women. We go toward collective and mutual goals of spiritual growth, empowerment, and transformation. Our power is not power over, but power with and power within. I will conclude my presentation by reading a poem written by Patricia Lynn Wiley. Title is Imagine a Woman. Imagine a woman who believes it is right and good. She is a woman. A woman who honors her experience and tells her stories, who refuses to carry the sins of others within her body and life. Imagine a woman who trusts and respects herself, a woman who listens to her needs and desires, who meets them with tenderness and grace. Imagine a woman who acknowledges the past influence on the present, a woman who has walked through her past, who has healed into the present. Imagine a woman who authors her own life, a woman who exerts, initiates, and moves on her own behalf, who refuses to surrender except to her truest self and wisest voice. Imagine a woman who names her own gods, a woman who imagines the divine in her image and likeness, who designs a personal spirituality to inform her daily life. Imagine a woman in love with her own body, a woman who believes her body is enough just as it is, who celebrates its rhythms and cycles as an exquisite resource. Imagine a woman who honors the face of the goddess in her changing body, a woman who celebrates the accumulation of her years and her wisdom, who refuses to use her life energy disguising the changes in her body and life. Imagine a woman who values the woman in her life, a woman who sits in circles of women, who is reminded of the truth about herself when she forgets. Imagine yourself as this woman. Thank you.
Well, that's going to be a hard act to follow. That was awesome. So before I started thinking about this, right, so I got asked to speak, and I thought, what the hell am I supposed to say about leadership? And then I talked to my partner about it, and she said, you're going to talk about this. And I said, that is great. So first off, that explains just how important it is to have a home and a family to come to, and to have that foundation in forming your own leadership and having that support. I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about my own personal faith journey, because that's fun, story time. I'm going to talk about privilege, and I'm going to talk about leadership. So first, of my own story, I want to highlight 2 scenarios, or two little anecdotes. The first is when I was in college at Mount Holyoke, and I was on the Newman board. For those who don't know, Newman is the Catholic organization on campus, and I was the multi-faith representative, which explains a lot. I was Catholic at the time, but I was keeping tabs on everyone else in school and all the awesome work they were doing. And it wasn't until I came to college that I knew a lot of other Catholics, and I knew a lot of queer people who had been Catholic. So it's so many conversations, right, go that same familiar way. Well, I grew up Catholic. Everyone understands that silence, especially in queer circles. And so I realized that maybe this was our call to ministry on campus, was working with people who had been so hurt by the church in the past. And so I went to our advisor and I said, yo, Anita, I got this great idea. Let's start some sort of queer group under the guise of Newman, because we need to reclaim Catholic power in this. And I used all sorts of church phrases like social gospel and other things I usually don't say, just to talk the talk and try to get in. So I went to Newman board, our next meeting, and Anita said, great, let's vote on this. So I go to the board, I explain what I'm thinking, I'm explaining why I'm thinking it, and what we need to do. And so the board of my peers votes on this, and they vote it down. People who are my friends voted this down. People who I respected and felt respected by voted this down. And then it was one of those moments where I'm like, do you not see me? Do you not see this work that we are called to do? And that's when I left the church. The second vignette is 2-3 years ago now, at the Philly Trans Health Conference. That is a conference for trans people, transgender people in Philadelphia. It happens every year. It's run by a sweet organization called the Mazzoni Center, and it's all things health. So I go with my friends. There's 5 of us in a car. We drive up from DC, and we look at the schedule. My God, there are choices, and all these panels you can go to. This is awesome. So I'm looking at the schedule, and I go to all these panels, and all of a sudden, halfway through the second day, I realize I've been on the spirituality track this whole time without even meaning to be. This is just what looked interesting, and this is what I chose. What does that tell you? Well, I said, it doesn't tell me anything. And I was at one of the sessions where there's just people bawling, right? They're just bawling about the church and what church has done to them, and what church has said about them behind their backs, to their faces, and everywhere in between. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, why are all these folks in this? We could be talking about how to get a sweet queer haircut over in the room over. Why are we here? Like, having this awful moment. And I realized, because this is community. because people were there because they were looking for a community of people who got it, of people who were trans, and of people who were religious. And it's so hard to find that in between. And I thought, wow, what an awesome experience. This should happen other places. Well, I can do that, right? Famous last words. And so all of a sudden out of that, I got on the bandwagon, applied to school, and here I am. One of the reasons why I think I had that reaction of, well, I can do that, is because I come from a crazy privileged place. I'm white. I had the good luck to be born in the US. My family is super educated. My parents met in law school. I'm the 5th generation woman graduate of college. This isn't about me. This is about my family and what I have inherited. I'm able-bodied. I like to think I'm articulate. And in addition to all of that, we're gonna do a 101 here. I have trans-masculine privilege. So this means that I'm a female-bodied person who wears a tie when they dress up. And what this means is that people look at me and listen to me differently than they do to other women. And it's a weird place to be. Because that sort of thing, to be a gender non-conforming person, can be really damning and can be really awful and gets you stared at in bathrooms and asked inappropriate questions. But it also means that when I walk down the street with my girlfriend, people don't give us a second look because they don't see. It means when I'm traveling internationally with friends and they feel uncomfortable in the streets, they walk with me and they don't feel uncomfortable anymore. What do I do with that? That's the question of all of this. What do you do with that? My God, it's a lot. And it's a responsibility. And so what I try to do is to speak up. Because I have that privilege. Because I have that safety. Because I have that support. When I was 15, I said, Ma, I got something to tell you. She goes, you're gay. This vest is a hand-me-down from my father who said, I can't wear this anymore, you have it.
Oh.
My God, I got good fortune in spades. And so that's why I need to be doing this. Because not everyone's got that privilege. And that's just something I keep coming back to when I keep thinking about leadership. It's what allows one to lead. What gives you the ability to do that, to stand up, to put that arm up, to sit in the front. And for me, I mean, that's where it comes from. I can't say I did this on my own. I can't say I'm a first. So on leadership, one of the things it means to lead is visibility. So it's coming to things like this and talking about trans privilege. It's being able to be in spaces and say, this is who I am, this is my experience, and this is my story. And that in itself is leadership. Because if people who are queer and trans keep saying stuff like this, other people are going to hear, and it's going to not be a voice in the wilderness. This is going to be everywhere. And the folks who need to hear it are going to hear it on both sides. People who've never heard about it before, and the people who sit in the back and say, oh, Christ, that's me. And all those folks got to be hearing this message. So, right, the people who I'm speaking with on this panel got mad leadership experience. We got a lot of feathers and a lot of hats, and I don't have that. But one way that we can lead is by contributing to conversations, to not being quiet and to speaking out. And that means in a place where you feel privileged and you feel safe, you need to raise that hand and you need to talk back when someone's saying something you don't agree with, when someone's saying something that's hurting you or that's hurting your friends or other people in your community. That's what leadership is. You don't need to be top dog, you just need to make sure that you have your voice heard when that's something that you can do. In addition, you need to empower others. And part of that is something that I definitely think about. Why was I asked to this panel? Who am I prohibiting from standing at this podium? And whose voices need to be heard? And how do I make sure that those people are handed the microphone when they need to be? And so that's what a lot of it's about, making sure that other people are heard and not talking for them. And I wouldn't even say enabling, because that's a loaded word. Enabling others, what does that mean? Where does that put the onus of power? But making sure that other people also have those opportunities. So I want to leave, after hearing the panel before me talk, I want to leave with 3 points. 3 things that I was like, yes, these are the things that are so necessary in leadership. Dr. Dar said it's so good. Don't apologize, my God. People say they're sorry for all sorts of stuff. You don't have to say you're sorry for having an opinion. You gotta say that. Don't couch it in an apology. You can couch it in your own experience all you want, but it's not an apology to say what you know to be true, for no one else, for at least yourself. Also, create a new norm. I realized this morning when I was helping setting up, I made a sign for the bathrooms, and I wrote restrooms to the right. And then I realized the men's room wasn't to the right. And so instead of making a new sign, restrooms, women's to the right, men's to the left, I just wrote restrooms to the right, parentheses, men's are to the left. Because it's so often women are the +1, women are the derivative. And so making a space where men are the +1 needs to happen. Like what Dr. Dar said. Men are, no matter how much stuff happens, the balance sheet's always in their favor. And so you gotta take back and reestablish what that norm is. The last thing I wanna say is bring others with you. And part of that is my own heritage. I did not bring myself here. Others have brought me here, both in my family and in my community. There are all sorts of people who went before me. I'm not the first queer person at BU. I'm not the first transgender nonconforming person at BU. There's a heritage that I have. There are other people who have been here for me. And I only hope that one day I can do the same for others. Thank you.
All right, friends, we have about 8 minutes for questions, and I'm sure that you do have questions. What I'd like for you to do, let's frame the questions this way. Let me preface it this way. Let me ask you to close your eyes, and I want you to do a bit of imagination here. I want you to imagine yourself in a context that is not your context. Imagine yourself as the one person in the room who is not like all the others. And I want you to think about the challenge of working in that context with people who likely have no cultural competency with which to relate to you. Thank you. Use that, and let's hear your questions.
This is for Myung, please. When you spoke about going around and visiting with your parishioners, I'm assuming that you were interested in listening to their stories as to helping you to establish some relationships. Were there parishioners who were just as interested in hearing your story? Did anybody ask, tell us about yourself?
Does everyone hear the question? All right.
Yes, I listened to our parishioners' story very much, and I asked them about their family and about their situation, anything suffering from current situation. But I also listened to them some questions about myself, but it was just limited to very simple, not profound one. about my family, that was the most question. Where is your family members? Are your mother or father are here in the USA or in your home country? That was the most question I've heard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a hand in the back, yes.
Thank you for sharing. I just wanted to ask about your experience having your bodies tokenized in positions of leadership, and what kind of negative and positive effects that is having and has had on your process developing as leaders.
The question is about having one's body tokenized and the impact of that upon leadership.
That is a really good question. Ooh, sorry. I think a lot of what I've tried to do with that is it's hard to do when it's just a visual encounter, but I think that's one of the reasons why humor is so important to me, is I find it's a great uniter, and it really takes the guard off people on both sides to sort of lessen the impact of the interaction, and yeah, just to sort of like lighten it up and be like, look, I'm like a person too, chill out, don't take yourself so seriously. In terms of leadership, I don't think for me so much I don't think I've necessarily been tokenized, but I've definitely been in a lot of tough situations where people gender me as male in front of colleagues. And colleagues who I haven't talked about this with get really ill at ease and weirded out about it. And so that's usually the toughest bit, is like how to navigate that. Because I don't feel like I need to correct anyone, that's fine. It's that when folks get uncomfortable, that I get uncomfortable.
Your question, if I may, also it's a great question about women in leadership. Just think for a minute. We've just seen an African woman win an Oscar, Lupita Nyong'o, and the response from the media largely is not about her acting ability, but about what she's wearing and how beautiful she looks. So, powerful question you're asking us about the organization of females' bodies. And I hope we grasp that and walk away with that. We've got a way to go. We've got a way to go with the isms in this world. Is there another question? Yes, Hero.
This is for Katie. I appreciate your honest sharing of your experience of transparent masculine privilege, apart from your struggle with your sexuality and the issues that you have to deal with every daily basis. I'm just wondering, because how the queer community deal with racial dynamics within the queer community. Because just like the heterosexual racial ethnic people can be oblivious of queer community, and I observed some of queer community, the homosexuality oriented people at the same time oblivious of racial ethnic issues. So I'm just curious how your community is dealing with these dynamics.
That's a good question, and I'm going to curse for a second. Shitty, they do a shitty job. I think there's a reason why the gay industrial complex has made marriage equality the issue, and not poverty, not incarceration, not job protections, especially because of the numbers are just astonishing of the violence and just the awful things that people in the US do to trans women of color. And I think there's a reason why gay marriage is the thing, because it's safe and because white men look real good on a cake.
I think that's a fine place for us to stop. I think we're at the time. We've ended on a wonderful theme and to carry it forward, and that's the intersectionality of oppressions. And that is something that we need to work on going forward. So thank you all. Thank you. Help me to thank our parents. I feel so true leader today because I should get all the credits. I chose these great panelists and presenters. But that's not true. I should be a liar. Actually, it's our board members and all staffs actually chose our great presenters and panelists and respond them today. Now it's your time to talk about the issues that you heard. So we are, our staff, Samantha Moore, is going to give you a little bit of this, directions about the small group discussion.
Okay, so if you have a folder, there should be a small piece of paper in there that has discussion questions. If you have a packet, it's on the packet, sort of, maybe the 4th page, look through it. I would like to invite any students who are sitting on the chairs to come forward and sit at the tables, because we were hoping to have, in the theme of the end of this, a lot of intersectionality for age, for positions, for ethnicity, everything. So if people could sort of mix it up, come forward if you're not sitting at a table. And then at your tables, if one person could read out the questions so that everybody can hear them, and then please feel free to choose, there are big questions, so please feel free to choose 1 or 2 to talk about, and I hope that we have a good discussion together. The discussion time will end, as it says on the schedule, at 3:25, and then after that we will go, at 3 o'clock, sorry, and then we will go into our break, so feel free to continue your discussions into the break.